טוב. ערב טוב וברכה רבותיי. ערב טוב. בעזרת השם, first of all. אני אומר את הצדיק רבי חיים פינטו. אני אומר את השם בראש חודש תמוז. May הקדוש ברוך הוא bless the entire קהילה, the entire קהל, and all that Hashem those that are close to the Torah and those who are not close to the Torah. with ברכה והצלחה, סייעתא דשמיא גדולה. And we all come to a place by Hashem of having our prayers heard and coming to a place by Hashem of receiving a personal redemption and a redemption for all klal Am Yisrael. Amen. You know, Rabbi, this morning we're sitting down and we're trying to think about what angle are we going to look at this week's parasha. So you know, Rabbi, that Parashat Korach is a parasha that is full of content in a manner like no other parasha possibly exists. So to strictly take the parasha and to just try to come to an understanding, we did it Baruch Hashem this week many times, throughout many classes. So we didn't feel as much as a desire to do so. But rather we try to see a little bit ahead of the upcoming days and weeks and see maybe if there's some sort of hint in this week's parasha that can help motivate us and help give us the strength to overcome and to prepare ourselves for these upcoming weeks. We now say that today it is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. That Rosh Chodesh Tammuz is essentially the beginning of times of extra tightness. We're not going to say Chas v'Shalom bad, but Gvurot. Where the HaKadosh says that Gvurah starts to lead in these months. We know from Yud Zayin Tammuz, we have the 3-week start, Ben HaMetzarim, times of, we can call danger, times of more probability of din, judgment. So we're entering into a time that in its nature, we feel more weight on us. We feel more tight. We feel more judgment. We have to be more careful. It's not times of just complete chesed and kindness and go around, do whatever you want. Not at all. So we thought to ourselves, being that Korach is always whether a week or a few weeks before the month of Tammuz and Av, we must have some sort of preparation in this week's parasha that can allow us to better not only understand, but overcome and prepare ourselves for these months and to use these months not only as just times of hardship, but to use it in our advantage. You know, but everything in this world could be a positive and could be a negative. It all depends how we use it. Something very negative can be turned very positive, something very positive can be turned very negative. Only in the car we're speaking about this idea of chesed and gvura that seem to be good and bad, that these good and bad are actually not necessarily always good and bad, but rather could be used in very different ways. So even in months like Tammuz and Av that seem to be tough months, there are months that they're a great opportunity for big Yeshuot. And today we would like to try to come to a little bit of an opening. We're going to speak about Tammuz and Av as the time comes. We're not going to get away from that. But there's an opening for entering into this period of time. So we see Rabotai, this week's parasha, Korach gets up and he makes a fight. He challenges Moshe Rabbeinu and he had the desire to be in a certain position. He was a man of great stature, a man of great honor. He didn't want to be where he was. He rather wanted to be at a higher level, at a higher place. Which was this idea of what? Of leaving his position as a Levi, and he wanted to take into prize the position of what? Of Kohen. He didn't like his place, he fought Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Being that the Kehuna was actually something that at that time belonged to all Am Yisrael. And at the time of the sin of the golden calf, Kehuna was taken out from Am Yisrael, from the firstborn, and given only to Aaron and his children. Korach wasn't happy. He said, I want my position back. It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished Korach for fighting to try to achieve Kehuna with a very strange punishment. And that's the punishment of what? The punishment of which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a new creation. Bria Barati, a new creation, a new punishment that never existed to this point, just for Korach. Now that is something that is very unique, being that HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't create almost anything after Briat HaOlam. And here we see Hashem goes out of his way to create this new punishment. What was so bad about what Korach did? It doesn't seem so destructive and so harmful, the fact that he came up and he wanted Kehuna. So what? How many Rabbanim fight for position of Rabbanim. We go to Eretz Israel, there is politics, there is votes, there is worlds of fights. What's so bad of Korach trying to be Kohen when he wasn't Kohen? And why was the punishment so harsh? It seems that it was a little bit eccentric. Tov, you want to put him back in place? Put him back in place, but create a new creation? Something's missing here. A part of our understanding is not clear to us, and it brings us to this place of not seeing the full picture. So I'd like to truly understand what really occurred here. So Zohar HaKadosh opens up with a few words of this week's parasha that talk about what Korach did. So the parasha opens up with Vayikach Korach. Rashi in many of the explanations says, what is Vayikach? That he took. He took what? Torah doesn't say. But rather the Mefarshim say that he took a different position. He separated himself from the norm. He didn't act in the normal fashion of how the world should be. Now the Torah was very vague. So being Lomdei Torah, those who study Torah, we want to understand what really he took and what did he change in his position that made such a big impact. The Zohar HaKadosh is very simple. He didn't just change his opinion and change his desire. He rather wanted to change his place in Olamot Ha'edom. He rather wanted to change in what position he holds, not in this world, but in the worlds above. He wanted to create change in the world above, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu never put in place in the first hand. What was that change? Zohar HaKadosh says the change between Keuna and Leviah. The change between a Kohen and a Levi. So the question is, what is this idea of switching between Kohen and Levi? And why are these things so important or so dramatic like we see? So the Zohar HaKadosh says, as we know, Kohen and Levi actually represent two different hanhagot, leaderships in the world. Presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, and of course, presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world above. Kohen represents what? Kohen represents chesed, kindness, love. Levi represents what? Din, gvura, judgment. So the question that we were thinking of when we looked at this week's parasha is that seems very odd. Or you could even go as far as saying that it seems backwards. Kohen, all day long, he's doing shechita. He's slaughtering animals. That's what he does from the morning to the night. That's his full-time job, slaughtering. And Levi, what do? They just sing. They create music. They create a beautiful atmosphere. They sing at the times of the korbanot. That should be chesed, and keuna should be what? Should be din. So why really is Levi holding the place of gvura and chesed holding the place of keuna, of Kohen? It seems backward. It seems opposite. So what is really happening with these positions of Kohen and Levi? And why do Kohen represent chesed? And why do Levi, more importantly, represent such a tough gvura when really all their job is to just sing, to just praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It seems quite odd. So in order to understand this, we said we need to understand and we have to look, what is this concept of gvura in the first place? We explained many times throughout our classes that when we hold this concept of judgment or strength or constraint or things that seem to be more tough, we have to make a very, very clear fact in our mind, which is gvura, judgment from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the form of judgment doesn't exist. In what sense? In the sense that any gvura that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't come as gvura for gvura. Any gvura which seems to be like judgment or strength, or even you can call it punishment, the Zohar HaKadosh says it's always a preparation for what? For chesed. A messiah, a helper for chesed. Being that from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kulo ratzufav, is only kindness. No din comes out from it. And we've explained this in many, many places. We have established this in many other classes. We're not going to repeat, because that would be rhetorical, of establishing this idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu only projects goodness, kindness. And sometimes they come in different forms and shapes and colors, but in the end, the goal of everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings down to the world is always positive. Now, there are cases in our life and in the world that we do certain acts that we can bring negative on ourselves. And that gvura, that din, that judgment, maybe really is judgment for the sake of judgment, but it means that it doesn't come from Hashem. If it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not judgment at all. It can't be din at all. It's chesed, din, preparing himself to be chesed. And that's what the Zohar HaKadosh gives an analogy, that whenever the Zohar gives an analogy, take it seriously. No analogy is given by the Zohar HaKadosh just for the sake of story. Every analogy that's given has deep, deep meaning and deep, deep understanding that we just need to come to a place of getting our heads to that place, and as a result of that, it makes sense. Zohar HaKadosh says, we want to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gvura in the world. Look at the king. A king sees his son, loves his son, wants his son to live a long life on the throne, wants his son to grow up with the ability to appreciate the good that he has, wants his son to not live in a way that chas v'shalom he'll lose his sense of life and his balance of life. What does the king do? Zohar HaKadosh says the king gets up, takes his son, and what does he do? Megaresh oto. Exiles him. Sends him to the land, sends him to the cities, and lets him live on his own. And as a result of living on his own, as a result of being a bandit, what happened? That son sees the world for what it is, hears the voice of the people, sees the struggles of the people, appreciates every single thing that he has, and when he returns back to the throne, not only that he will be happier and he will be more excited and more appreciative, but he will see the world for its full picture and see the world for its full meaning, and as a result of that, he will live what? Live happier, more meaningful, more blessed life. Concluding that what? Concluding that judgment from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, din, doesn't exist. Everything that comes from Hashem in every single shape or form always exists with one simple aspect. And the aspect of complete chesed, complete kindness with no other existing entity that exists. And that's, Rabotai, something that I think that we need to establish within our minds in the most prominent way possible. Because a lot of the times we think that this idea of judgment is actually a bad thing. Every judgment that occurs is always a judgment that gets put in the world just to bring us close. Zohar HaKadosh gives another analogy that can give us a little bit of an indication to what extent HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts judgment in the form of kindness. We now tell you there are two forms of love. There is one form of love that is stagnant, a form of kindness which is stagnant, that exists where it exists, and there it sits. And then there is a form of love that grows, a form of love that is deep, a form of love that is able to constantly develop to become something bigger than what it is. Zohar HaKadosh says, usually that form of love that is deeper and more meaningful and doesn't stay stagnant is the form of love that comes to fruition in the aspect of what? What we call ga'agua. Now what's ga'agua? Ga'agua, in simple translation, is this idea of what? Missing. Having the desire to be close with one another. Or in simpler words, the same thoughts that the son of the king had when he was exiled. He loved his father, he appreciated what he had, he appreciated the throne, he appreciated the people that were around him, but he truly didn't know how much those things were important to him and how much he has love for them. Until when? Until he comes to the place of what? Of being split from them. And the fact that that individual was split from something that he loved so much, not only that split doesn't cause a fracture in the love and within the connection, but rather it does what? Makes it stronger. Or it brings up to the surface a much deeper, much more profound level of love and of connection and of chesed. Zohar HaKadosh says, that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gvura in the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gvura in the world in every single way was never a form of punishment, but rather a form of what? Rather a form of preparation to create more love, to create more connection, to create more chib'ah, to create more ga'agua in the world. Where there is nothing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants more than ga'agua, missing. The desire to come close, the desire to be closer than it was before. And as a result of that, that separation, or what seemed to be din, in that moment, actually turns into what? Actually turns to the deepest form and the deepest shape of what? Of chesed. The deepest shape and form of love and of kindness. So that, Rabotai, in essence, in summary, is what we call gvura. It's the couple that splits, not to split forever and to go two different ways, but rather to see whether or not there is a love that comes up to the surface that would cause them to come together at a more deep and a more committed way for one another. That is gvura. So the question is, how does this have anything to do with Levi? What is this concept of the gvura of Hashem, like we mentioned, which is this idea of wanting to come close and having actually a separation for a connection, have any sort of application for Shevet Levi? What's the connection between them? Zohar HaKadosh says, very simple. Zohar HaKadosh says, Levi represents gvura for its ability of what? Of shir. What's shir? Song. How do we come to such an understanding? The Zohar HaKadosh and the Tikkunim give a beautiful teaching about the moments before HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the world. The Zohar HaKadosh says that Bereshit, what is Bereshit? Bereshit, and the Zohar HaKadosh puts together this little sequence of letters, comes out to the word Tohav Shir. Now what is this concept? This concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was in love with what? With this idea of shir, with this idea of song, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the beginning of all time desired song in a manner that there was like no other possible. Why song? What's the connection to Hashem loving song? Sounds a little bit ridiculous. What is this idea? Zohar HaKadosh says, in the essence of what we call a song, exists a very, very simple core that makes a song what a song is. Which is what? Which is this bleeding aspect of ga'agua. What's ga'agua? Ga'agua is missing. Ga'agua is when a person wants to, there's a word for it in English, to yearn. To yearn for something that is not close with him, to find desire for something that is not at the closest of where it was once. Zohar HaKadosh says that shir, music, and song specifically, in every single level, represents this concept of desire of ga'agua, desire to come close, desire to grow. And the reason of that being was, like we mentioned, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want the world to just love him with a flat, stagnant love and connection and relationship. Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to grow with him and to have our love and commitment and our connection to him grow as well. The problem is that when a person is too close to something, he tends to lose his ahava, tends to lose his desire to be close. So what's necessary in that moment is what? Something that we call ga'agua. What's ga'agua? Missing. What is missing? When a person feels that there's a lack of that individual in his life, and within his heart, the desire of coming close gets awakened. That is the essence of music, of song. And we see this, Rabotai, even in today's modern day. If we look at music, we're not talking about the noise that today you hear when you go to places where it's just boom, 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 boom. When you have this idea of song, of a man singing, there's something very, very common with almost every single song that exists. Where it's not about a man talking about what he has, but rather a man showing love and desire to be close with something that he is not as close as he wants to be. Whether if it's something that was taken away from him, whether it's something that he wants to have a stronger desire to, a stronger connection with. That's the essence of what music is. That's the essence of what song is. Song wasn't an idea of just getting up and praising what you have, but rather this idea of awakening desire to do what? To connect, to be one. Zohar Kadosh says, that is song. And that is the secret of Bereshit. What's Bereshit? Tohav Shir. That Hashem wanted this idea of missing Bnei Israel and Bnei Israel missing Him. So He created the world with what? Bereshit. What's the next two words? Bara Elokim. The idea of Tohav Shir, the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have Bnei Israel to miss Him and to want to come close to Him was strong enough in which He structured the world Bidin, with judgment. And that's the idea of Bara Elokim. What does Bara Elokim mean? He created Elokim. What's Elokim? Din. It's the name of Hashem that represents Din. So at the root of even the creation of the world, Hashem said, I want that ga'agua to exist between me and between my creations, so I'm going to create the world with Din. And with Din comes as a result separation. And that separation was always created not as a punishment, but rather what? Rather an opportunity to allow the man to awaken within his heart a higher desire to come close. A bigger ratzon to be connected once again. A ratzon, a desire that never existed before. And that is the reason in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in the beginning with din, with judgment. Not chas v'shalom because He wanted to be judgeful and mean and harsh. But rather He wanted Bnei Israel to love Him and that love to constantly grow. And He wanted us to have a possibility to have space for our love to constantly grow. And that's why even the first creation that He creates is what? Malachim. Man was much later. Malachim, what's their job? What's their job? Song. Their worshipping of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is through music, is through singing towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, representing Hashem's love for what? Hashem's love for that separation that exists, that awakens love, that the individual wants to come closer than ever. That is something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu set in place from the beginning of the creation of the world. And this is something that we can see with every king. A king is loved and admired, and people are curious, and people want to be close to him, people want to understand him, not because he's seen, not because he's present, not because everywhere you walk around in the street you can see him there, but rather quite opposite. That the king is what? The king is unseen. He's always hidden. He's always in his chambers. Nobody knows what he is doing. Nobody sees him. No one's able to access him. That separation causes what? That separation causes ga'agua. That separation creates some sort of love that wouldn't exist otherwise, that makes the people desire to understand, to come close to the king. So as a result of that, whenever the king is coming by, till today you see it with king and queen of London or even here. They know that the king and queen is just driving by for 1 minute. People wait hours in line just to see the king for a moment. And that little bit that they see, what happens? That little bit that they see awakens within him a love to connect more than ever. To have love and admiration that they would have never had without that separation. That is the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu installed within the world by creating gvura, by creating separation, by creating tightness, by creating this idea of like judgment. Not as a form of punishment, but rather as a form of allowing possibility for love, for connection, to inspire and to awaken, and for a person to have the desire within him. Now that's very convenient. Whenever the king shows up to a place, what do? They play music. Why you play music? To dance? No, it's not to dance, because it's disrespectful. So why you play music when the king comes? What's this idea of playing music when the king walks into a room? It sounds a little bit ridiculous. What's the point?
Announce his arrival.
So the king was hidden. You couldn't see him. An opportunity to come close is becoming available. So what do they play? Moments before he comes, they play music. And that music, if we like it or if we don't, if we know why or if we don't know why we do it, that music is like a sense of awakening to the people. Now it's your chance to desire to come close to the king. Because now the king will be accessible. So now anyone that wants to approach the king and to come close to him, the music awakens that ahava. And that is the essence of what? Of shir. Shir is a form of judgment, of din, that at its essence is not punishment, but it awakens us to come close. And this proves and closes this idea of what? This idea of there is no judgment that comes from Hashem. Rather, every judgment that comes from Hashem is always a preparation for what? A preparation to come closer, a preparation to get more bracha, a preparation to have more presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our life. And we see Sabotai almost every aspect of our life, in every aspect of our Torah. We see this in Shabbat. Shabbat we call Shabbat Melkita, day of Kingdomship. It's a day of Kingdomship that doesn't last the whole week. How does it occur? One day the king arrives. He is present. He is with us. We celebrate. We eat with the king. We show like there is a possibility to come close. But then what happens? The king hides for 6 days. And when the king hides for 6 days, in our heart, what's supposed to exist and what's supposed to awaken is what? Gagua, love, desire to once again be close. When the king is about to arrive, what do? We all gather in Bet Knesset, and what do we start to do? We start to do what, Rabotai? To sing. To sing what? The shirim and the zimrot of what? Of Shabbat. The songs of Shabbat, or in simpler words, the essence and the act that awakens within ourselves the desire to come close. That's what Shabbat is. Shabbat is Lashuv. Shabbat in its core of the word, Shabbat means to return, to come close again. The only way you can come close is with din, with judgment. That judgment that we look at as separation actually is the cause of the biggest love and the biggest chesed. That is the essence of Shabbat. So we find that the biggest brachot that we have in our life don't even come at chesed, but rather they come as what? They come from separation indeed. But that separation, when it turns into chesed, that chesed becomes the purest chesed could be. So it's like the father that sent the child. It wasn't easy for him. He didn't do it as a punishment. But when the child came back and the child learned his lesson, now the child has many years of goodness from that reaction. That harsh act turns into what? The deepest form of chesed. And that, Rabotai, is something like we mentioned, it's very, very, very consistent. We call tables, Rabotai, what? Shulchan, is it chesed or din? Din. We say Shulchan dome le what? Shulchan is similar to what? To Mizbeach. What's Mizbeach? The altar. What do we do in the altar? We sacrifice. Shulchan, table, represents what? Din, judgment. But even though it's judgment, what does these tables help us do? They help us get together. They help us gather. They help us sit on Shulchan Shabbat as one, with a unification. So that din actually turns what? Becomes into the biggest chesed. That separation actually becomes what? Into the biggest form of reunion, the biggest form of connection, the biggest form of receiving the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The same thing could even be said about what? The same thing could even be said about wine. Friday night, we're accepting HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, we're accepting the Malchut, we're missing the Malchut, we're excited to have the Malchut, and we drink wine. Now, but that wine is what? First of all, it's a drink of kings. It's the drink of malachim, of kingdomship. Or in simpler words, something that represents din, big judgment. We even put wine on the mizbeach to add to the redness of it. Wine is red, it represents like dam. There's no more judgeful, edible food possible than wine. But with the wine, what do? With the wine we gather. With the wine we become happy. With the wine, we're able to lekadesh, to glorify and to sanctify our day. With the wine, we're able to come to a deeper form of connection with one another, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a way that we couldn't do it with any other form of the kindful liquid, like water or whatever it can be. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created separation, vura, judgment in this world as a form to come closer. And that's what we actually read every Friday night. We say, with the Kiddush, we're going to lematek et dinim b'shorasham. We're going to sweeten the judgment, not on a surface level. Chesed, it sweetens judgment on a surface level. Changes the potency of the judgment. But when judgment itself, when din itself, turns into chesed by making that din as a gagua, as a form of coming even closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even the root of the din completely changes. Even the root from where the judgment comes down to the world and into our life completely changes too. Turns into something completely new. And that is something that is actually taught in many places in the Zohar and in many places in the Kabbalah. We say there are two pieces to Hashem's consciousness. There is Chokhmah and there is Bina. Zohar Kadosh says, Bina is on the left side. So left is usually what? Gvura, judgment. Chokhmah is on the right side. The right is usually Chesed. Zohar Kadosh says that Bina is the root of all judgments. But being that it's the root of all judgments, it's also the root of all kindnesses and the root of the sweetening of all judgments. Meaning the key of sweetening all the other judgments in our life is using the judgment itself and turning it into chesed, turning it into goodness. Understanding that the separation is supposed to turn into a deeper form of love. When that happens, not only that we sweeten the judgment in one aspect, in one place in the world, but rather as we sweeten the judgment to its core in every single aspect of our world, in every single aspect of our lives. And that is the idea of what? That is the idea of the song. That the song in its core was always a din that in its nature, in its essence, always awakens us to come to a place of chesed. We see that even with ourselves. When we put music on, even if it's a sad song or a song with great meaning, it brings within ourselves pieces that we would never have found with any other act that we would have done. Music pulls out pieces of emotion, of desire, and of inspiration that doesn't exist in any other place. And music is only one thing that we're using here as an example of judgment, hardship, separation, or like what we call ester panim, Hashem covering His presence, covering His face, that can be used to bring us to a place of bigger success, of bigger kirva, of a bigger connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we mentioned, the Bina, the root of all judgment, is also the root of all kindness. And it's in our hands to turn it into that. So the question is, how does this have to do with Levi? What does this concept of song and connecting and having gagua have anything to do with Shevet Levi, that the idea of song was given to them? The idea is very simple. When we look in the Torah Kedusha, and we see when Levi was born, the Zohar Kadosh says when Yaakov looked at Levi, he saw a big deal. He saw a big judgment. But he understood that this judgment is not a judgment which is bad, but rather it's a judgment that will create more chiv'ah, more ahava, more achdut, more unity. And that's why he even called him Levi. Why did he call him Levi? It is ki apam livani Elokim, which means what in simple translation? He said, Hashem, this son will make me come to a place of be in complete unity with my wife Leah. Till this point, Yaakov held like a grudge, held a separation. Leah was not his ideal wife. He didn't want Leah. He was still holding like a sadness, a judgment, some sort of a distance from Leah. The moment Levi was born, that Yaakov saw that he was judgment, he said, through this din, through this judgment, what? I will be able to connect myself with what? I will be able to connect myself with my wife, with Leah. And there is no bigger connection than the connection between two people. The connection between a man and a connection between his wife. And that was the essence of Levi. Levi's job was what? It was song. We even see, Rabotai, when a couple get married, and when a couple, two entities that were not together, there was separation. They defied that separation and destroyed that separation, become one. We do in the brachot, we do what? Sheva brachot. In Sheva brachot, what do we say? Kol sason, kol simcha. Why kol? Just say simcha, the chatan, the kala. Why kol sason, kol simcha? The sound, the voice of sason, the voice of simcha. the voice of Chatan, the voice of Kala. Just say one time the voice for Kol Chatan maybe, and that's it. Why this multiplication of Kol? Because the job of voice, like we mentioned, was what? Was always supposed to connect between two entities that have separation and make them one, but not just one that are closer than they could ever be beforehand. As Zohar Kadosh says, that was the job of Levi. Levi's job in the world wasn't to just come forward and to create ambiance in Bet HaMikdash. The job of Levi was to prove something very simple. It was to prove that every single member of Bnei Israel, within his heart, has a place that a desire to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is possible. The Kohen would bring it to fruition by doing the Korbanot, but the Leviim would bring sweetness to what? To the din at its root. Meaning what? The Kohen came to the individual and said, okay, you sinned, yalla, let me clean your sin. Surface. It's like I'll fix your mess. The Levi is what? The Levi is the Gvura, that strength that the king brings that does what? That proves that within every one of us, we have the desire, we have the will to come close to Hashem. It's a hidden ga'agua. It's a hidden love. It's a hidden growing love that can only come to fruition with what? With some sort of separation. But clearly the world has separation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in its nature. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. But that separation awakens us and brightens that peace that is hidden within all of us of the desire to be one with Hashem. Like we mentioned, song was always something that was brought right before the king, right before Shabbat. So song proved that what? Song proved that there is a pirut, there is a distance, there is a lack of unity, there is a lack of being wholesomeness, there is a lack of being together, but it's fine. Because after this love and after this gagwa, the reunion that will come out of it will be much bigger than it was before. That was the job of Levi. Proving that even in a world that there is ester panim and there is lack of ability to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, still our love is growing. Still there is place to desire to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even in the dark. So maybe we can say that this is where Korach fell dramatically. Korach looked in the world, and even though he was tzaddik, he fell short by understanding that his job as a Levi, which seemed to be judgment, was actually the highest position that it can possibly be. It's proving the goodness within every single Jew, before he sinned, after he sinned, regardless of sin, just the entity of the Jew himself. The job of Korach was always never Gvura or Levi, never a judgment just for judgment. We said judgment for judgment is sitracha. Judgment is for judgment is impurity. You're probably bringing it on yourself, chas v'shalom. But the judgment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu inflicts is always an influence that what? That is supposed to create chesed, supposed to create more love and more desire in Hashem. That's what Korach fell short in. That's what Korach didn't understand. That's what Korach couldn't comprehend. Where he said, I don't want this job of Gvura. I don't want this job of judgment. I don't want this job of strength, of like suffering. I want chesed. Leave me alone with Gvura. Bring me chesed. I want to be Kohen. Korach was unable to understand that through the strength, through the Gvura, what a person could achieve and the impact that it could bring to the world. The highest, much higher levels than any form and sort of chesed that could exist. And this explained exactly why the punishment of Korach was so steep and so big. We mentioned that in the beginning of the creation of the world, from the beginning of it all, before Hashem created everything, he loved one thing, which was what? The desire of having Gadwa. He loved this thought of having love that can constantly expand, of having a relationship that can constantly grow. And that was the idea of what? Tohav Shir, Hashem's love for music. And even from before he created the world, the foundation of the world was judgment, in order to reach to this place of what? In order to reach this place of Ga'agwa, and this Ga'agwa to create even a bigger reunion that ever existed, like we explained multiple times. Korach What did he do? He tried to cancel that same very gvura, judgment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu built the world on. Which he built the world on what? On this ability of being hidden from us, like a king that's hidden in his chambers, that creates a desire for us to try to come close. That's what Korach intentionally or unintentionally tried to nullify. That's what Korach intentionally or unintentionally wanted to cancel. Wanted to cancel the Gvura Levim. He wanted to cancel Leviah completely. Clearly he told even in Israel, let's be Kohen. We don't need to be anything but Kohen. We all have the ability to be chesed. Let's all be kindness. Korach's mistake that he brought upon himself a state of the world before Buriat HaOlam. He brought upon himself a state of the world even before HaKadosh Baruch Hu started to create, and what he destroyed was what? What he destroyed was the Gvura that attaches Bnei Israel together. So the punishment that he received was the punishment of what? A punishment that didn't even exist from before Buriat HaOlam. He took himself out of Buriat HaOlam. He was always created as the essence for one purpose, which was what? Was the purpose. Levi was born to connect. Yaakov and Leah, Bnei Israel and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He left his post, left his position, and as a result of that, he had no more place in the world. He cancelled his existence from the root, from the beginning of his creation. So in simple words, he brought himself back to a place and back to a state in which everything is new. Any punishment that Hashem would give him would be something new, because he created a reality for himself, which was what? He completely nullified his purpose in the world. If you nullify your purpose in the world, where does he stand? Where does he sit? Where does he be? Korach's mistake, where he tried to bring to the world a cancellation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gift, which was Shira, some sort of distance that creates love to come together. And this explains many different aspects in this week's parasha. We say that Veikach Korach ben Yitzhar beKehat, ben Levi. Korach, son of Kehat, son of Yitzhar, son of Levi. Rashi explains right there, Yaakov asked to not be mentioned. Why? Yaakov said, don't mention me. Please, my name, I don't want it to be. So explanations, and the Mefashim, they say, he said, don't mention me because he didn't want to be associated with a grandson which was such a rasha. It's something so wrong. What's very interesting, that on the Sefer Yochasin, and at the time of the Akavat HaKorbanot, it says that Yaakov's name was mentioned. Where it was Korach, ben Kehat, ben Yitzhar, ben Levi, ben Israel. Where Zohar HaKadosh says, Yaakov refused for his name to be mentioned as Yaakov, but he said, you know what? I'm fine with mentioning my name as Israel. So why is it okay that we mention Israel and not Yaakov? Why are you allowed to mention one of Yaakov's names and not the other? Why was Yaakov so profoundly stubborn on saying, mention this name, not that name? So he thought about it and he said, maybe we could say, that what's this idea of Israel? Israel are the same letters of what? Shir El. What is Shir El? A song to Hashem. A prayer to Hashem. Why? A prayer to Hashem. That's why we said every class needs to go into people's ears and to think that it's for them. Baruch Hashem. So, Maze Israel.
Yaakov lived long before Korah.
Ken Vadai, of course, you're right, Tzaddik. You were right. No, you are right. Korach lived a long time before. But you know, Tzaddikim, when they are no longer alive, they're even more present. So he was able to argue and to say what he wants and what he doesn't. I can guarantee you that. And putting that aside, it said even in Zohar HaKadosh, at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, actually came back from the dead. And they were present throughout all the 40 years watching from far of Bnei Israel. It's a very deep teaching of Zohar HaKadosh that we're not going to talk about it right now. What's Israel? Shir El. This idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us a gift of praying to Him and having a desire and a place in which we could connect to Him even in the darkest places of darkness that could exist. Now, where does the name Israel come from? Israel comes from Yaakov with what?
Malach.
With the angel. They fought the entire night. And the end of the night, the angel said, Yaakov, leave me alone. I'm going to be late. You're going to be late to do what? I'm going to be late to do what? To sing. The angel said, it's my time to sing to Hashem. I need to go sing to Hashem. I can't be fighting with you when my shift is coming. Yaakov said, I'm not letting you go. Unless you do what? Unless you bless. Baracheni. So maybe we can say that the bracha, what was the bracha? The bracha, we said, give me the bracha to be able to sing to Hashem like you do. Give me the ability to have this gift of song the same way you have it towards Hashem. Like an angel with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give it to me too. With the gift of shira, of song, which is this idea of a growing potential of connection between a man and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was given to Israel by an angel, which is an identity of Gvura, as a gift for Yaakov. Where Yaakov represents Pirud, represents a time of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Yaakov they have separation, or ability of separation, and Israel represents what? It represents entity of Yaakov, which is Gadlut, unity, a higher level of Yaakov, an older level of Yaakov, a Yaakov which is one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a Yaakov that is not comparable to the smaller version of Yaakov when he was young. Maybe we could say Yaakov said, don't mention my name Yaakov. Mention only Israel. Because Israel at its core will teach you and show you what Korach did wrong. That he tried to cancel and nullify this idea of what? Of Israel, of Shir El, of song to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of desire to have more love and to have a missingness and yearning for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Korach tried to cancel. That's what Korach tried to nullify. That's what Korach tried to take out of the world. Maybe we can say that was his mistake, that is his failure, and that's why he fell the path that he fell. Now, how did this Rabotai prepare us for these months that are coming up ahead? We said these are months of Deen. These are months of judgment. Months that Bet HaMikdash, the first, the second, the tearing of, the burning of the Torah, the falling of the wall. So much negative happened in these few months that we are about to overcome. How does this have anything to do? So, in order to understand it, we have to understand what was the purpose of all this destruction. Every single Tisha B'Av, we teach this teaching, we go over the Zohar HaKadosh in the Adra Rabbah that talks about Hashem's relationship with Bnei Israel, and talks about what happens on a daily basis while the Bet HaMikdash is destroyed. When we look at this idea of destruction, and we mourn, we sit on the ground on Tisha B'Av, and we have these all weeks of tightness, it's not just to do custom, or just to remember, or just to think of an occurrence that occurred in the past. That was never the point of the destruction. That was never the point of all the deen. But rather the destruction and the judgment was always caused for what purpose? It was caused for the purpose that Hashem saw that Bnei Israel have Bet HaMikdash, they have the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but their love, their desire to grow is stagnant. So what did Hashem do? He said, no problem. Let me break. Let me split. Let me create a void. Let me create distance. And that void and distance was always meant to do what? Not to make us forget. Not to have that judgment be just judgment and it's for the sake of judgment, but rather be what? Be something that we're all going to look into our lives and say, look what we're missing. Look what we could have had. If life could have been so much better, look what we're missing out on. Or in simpler words, develop within ourselves what? Gagua. Desire to come close. All these 3 weeks these few months are weeks and months of judgment that were always meant to do what? To cause us not to just remember, but to want it. And the more we want it, and the more ga'agua that awakens within us, the more we can bring Bet HaMikdash back. The more we'll have the desire to build it again. And that's what we mentioned every single Tisha B'Av. We're not living in a day to just fast, not eat and finished. If that's the case, then you're not doing Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av was always to reflect on your life, to see what is missing and to realize what a person needs to do in order to bring that missing aspect to his life. Or in simple words, to create like a place of song, of gahagua, like a man that is singing for something that is no longer with him. So maybe we could say that's the idea of Shir HaShirim even. Shir HaShirim, we call it. Who can translate Shir HaShirim?
Song of songs.
Song of all songs.
Yeah.
So meaning Shir HaShirim really has this idea of songs. What's Shir HaShirim talk about? Love, missing, connection. What a loss of love that exists now. He's chasing his beloved. He's searching for his beloved. It's this exact, again, pattern of what a song is supposed to look like. Not like that, but a song is supposed to be desired to be connected. Rashi, in the beginning of Shir HaShirim, says, why did Shlomo write this song in such a vague manner where he didn't give a name? He gave each person to read the song and to apply it within his own life. He didn't give enough context to each for it to look like it was an occurrence of the past. Rashi says, because Shlomo Melech Alav Hashem knew that throughout the generations there will be exiles, there will be distraction, there will be lack of presence of Hashem, there will be ester panim. And with all that destruction, all that negativity that exists, Bnei Israel need something to hold on, need something to grasp that will do what? That will cause them to awaken within them ga'agua. It will cause them to awaken within them desire to come close. Or like the words of Shlomo Melech, searching for his beloved, praying for his beloved, feeling no water in the world can wash away the love of his beloved. All these ideas of what? All these ideas of ga'agua, a desire to come close, a desire to be once again. Rabotai, these times of judgment or weeks of hardship that we're going to overcome, Bezrat Hashem, are not weeks of judgment, but rather they are what? They are weeks that we can come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and awaken our desire and our need for HaKadosh Baruch Hu like no other place or time in our life possible. And that's why we say we're entering into times of tightness, of din, but that din is only what? An opportunity to catch Hashem. How? We say, Ben HaMetzarim, times of tightness, times of din, Kol Asher Yirdefuah, Yasigua. Anyone that chases Hashem at times of judgment, at times of tightness, or in other words, through judgment, through tightness, anyone that chases Hashem will find him. Anyone that reaches his hand out to grab HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to create a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will find him. So Bezrat Hashem, in the merit of the Tzaddik, Rabbi Moshe Pinto, in the merit of all these months, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bezrat Hashem turn these months into months not just of Gvura, just for the sake of Gvura, but rather Gvura that will cause us, to give us the strength and the ability to reach out our hands, to grab all what we want, the desire for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Parnasah, Zivug, Refuah, whatever it is, in order that we can all come to a place of living a life that will be what? That will have meaning, will have purpose, will have blessing, that we will all, B'ezrat Hashem, find that place of Ga'agua in our hearts for HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. Amen. B'ezrat Hashem. Is there any questions, Rabotai? Can I be Yaakov?